For more than a century, Harley-Davidson has survived just about everything the world could throw at it. Wars, recessions, foreign competition, even the brink of bankruptcy. But on July 8th, the company crossed a line almost no American manufacturer ever wants to cross. S&P Global officially downgraded Harley-Davidson's debt to junk status. Here's what makes that so strange. Harley isn't in freefall. Some of its latest sales numbers are actually moving in the right direction. So why would Wall Street lose confidence right now? Because this isn't the same problem Harley fought in the 1980s or during the financial crisis. This time, the challenge runs much deeper. Let's get into it. What actually happened on July 8th? To answer that, you need to understand what a junk rating actually means, because it's not just a number on a spreadsheet. Credit ratings are basically a report card agencies like S&P, Moody's, and Fitch hand out based on how likely a company is to pay back its debt. Investment grade means low risk. Junk means the agency thinks there's a real chance something could go wrong down the line. Harley's rating dropped one notch, from BBB- to BB+. One notch doesn't sound dramatic, but that single notch is the line between investment grade and junk, and crossing it changes things. Some big investment funds are required by their own rules to only hold investment grade debt. Once a company falls below that line, those funds are forced to sell, borrowing costs tend to climb, and the whole business gets more expensive to run on credit. S&P didn't do this because of one bad quarter. In their report, they pointed directly at Harley's own turnaround plan, something the company is calling Back to the Bricks, led by new CEO Artie Starrs. The idea is simple. Sell cheaper, more accessible bikes, win back market share, and worry about fixing profit margins later. S&P's math on that plan is brutal. They expect Harley's adjusted profit margin to sit at just 5 to 6% through 2026, compared to margins above 16% back in 2022 and 2023, and they think it could take several years to climb back toward even 10%. And it's not just the parent company that took the hit. Harley-Davidson Financial Services, the arm of the business that actually loans people the money to buy these bikes, got downgraded too, dropping from an A3 rating all the way down to B. Here's why that detail matters so much. Roughly 70% of Harley buyers finance their purchase through HDFS, Harley-Davidson Financial Services. If HDFS's own borrowing costs go up because of this downgrade, that cost eventually lands on the customer in the form of a higher interest rate on their motorcycle loan. Higher payments mean fewer people can afford the bike. Fewer sales mean worse financials. Worse financials invite another downgrade. In finance, there's a name for that kind of feedback loop. People call it a death spiral. Harley has actually walked right up to the edge of one before, back in 2009, which we'll get to. The numbers behind the collapse and the twist. So let's look at the damage. In the fourth quarter of 2025, Harley posted a net loss of close to $280 million, more than double the loss from the same quarter a year earlier, on revenue that fell 28%. For the full year, total revenue dropped 14% to around $4.5 billion, and the company shipped about 124,000 motorcycles worldwide, down 16%. Here's the number that really tells the story. Back in 2006, at Harley's peak, the company sold roughly 344,000 motorcycles in a single year. By 2024, that number had fallen to around 151,000. That's not a dip. That's a company that lost more than half its business over 2 decades. And the market share numbers back it up. In 2019, Harley controlled about 49% of the American heavyweight motorcycle market. Basically, half of every big bike sold in America was a Harley. By 2025, that had fallen to 34.5%. Over those years, roughly 1 out of every 3 heavyweight buyers Harley used to own in the US went somewhere else. But remember what we said at the very start. Some of Harley's latest numbers are actually moving in the right direction, and this is where that becomes impossible to ignore. When Harley reported its first quarter of 2026, just a few months before the junk downgrade, global retail sales were actually up 8%. North American sales were up 14%. And Harley's US market share, the same number that had been sliding for years, climbed back up to 38%. So think about what that means. Harley's turnaround plan is genuinely starting to work, at least on paper, on the sales side. And Wall Street downgraded them to junk anyway. Why would S&P punish a company that's actually selling more bikes? Because selling more bikes at a much lower profit margin doesn't fix the underlying problem. It just proves the company can win back customers by giving away the profit to do it. S&P even said Harley's market share could climb all the way back toward the mid-40s if these new, cheaper models keep landing. That's the bet Harley is making right now. Grow first, worry about the money later. And Wall Street just told them, we don't believe you can afford to wait that long. The dealerships are dying. If you want to see the human cost of this strategy, you don't need a finance degree. You just need to look at what's been happening to Harley dealerships over the past couple of years. Across 2025, dealerships closed their doors in states including Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. And it wasn't just small operations. Hoosier Harley-Davidson in Elkhart, Indiana, owned by the Saputo family, closed in January 2026 after 19 years in business. In San Francisco, the Dudley Perkins dealership, a store that had been selling Harleys for nearly a century, shut its doors for good. A nearly 30-year-old dealership in New York City folded as well, liquidating whatever was left at discounts up to 75% off. A dealer council chairman named George Gatto put it bluntly in an interview, saying there are simply too many dealers for the number of new bikes being sold today, and that margins on new bikes are the worst they've ever been. Here's what most people don't realize about how dealerships actually work. When a dealer stocks Harleys on their lot, they don't own those bikes outright. They borrow money to buy that inventory through something called floor plan financing, at interest rates between 8 and 10%. Some dealers have reportedly paid between $25,000 and $40,000 a month just in interest on bikes sitting unsold in their own showroom. Now, to be fair, Harley has actually made real progress cleaning this up. By the first quarter of 2026, worldwide dealer inventory had dropped 22% compared to a year earlier, down to around 44,000 units, as the company deliberately slowed shipments to match what dealers could actually sell. That's genuinely good news for dealer health going forward. But that fix came after years of pain. Years where dealers were sitting on bikes they couldn't move, bleeding floor plan interest every single month, while corporate kept shipping more inventory their way. At one point, dealer groups reportedly pushed back hard enough that corporate finally listened. The damage from those years is exactly what closed dealerships like the ones you just heard about, and no amount of inventory discipline in 2026 brings those storefronts back. Nobody under 50 wants one. Now let's talk about the part of this story that explains basically everything else. Harley has a customer age problem, and it's been getting worse for years, not better. Officially, Harley says their average buyer is 49 years old. But UBS analyst Robin Farley has argued for years that the real number is higher, likely into the late 50s.
It has been a problem for a while here with an average rider aging.
Once you account for how the official figure gets calculated through financing data alone. Whatever the exact number is, the pattern is obvious to anyone who's ever watched a Harley owners group ride through their town. This is a brand built by and for baby boomers, and baby boomers are aging out of riding. Knees start to hurt, reflexes slow down. Eventually, people stop riding altogether, and their old bike ends up on the used market instead of a new Harley getting sold. The generation that was supposed to replace them hasn't shown up in the numbers. A base model Harley starts north of $20,000. Touring bikes run anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000. Compare that to a Honda or Yamaha entry-level bike that can be had for well under $5,000. And you start to understand why a lot of younger riders have looked elsewhere entirely. It's not just price either. It's identity. For a lot of younger riders, the whole Harley look, the leather vest, the loud pipes, the cruiser riding position, feels like something that belongs to their dad's generation, not theirs. Meanwhile, brands like Royal Enfield have built their entire identity around being approachable and adventure-ready. Bikes that feel like they belong to the rider's generation instead of their father's garage. Royal Enfield sold over 1 million motorcycles globally in their most recent fiscal year, roughly 10 times what Harley sold in the same period, largely on the back of affordable mid-size bikes. This is exactly why Harley is now betting so heavily on two specific new models. The reborn Sportster, expected to launch around $10,000, and an even cheaper bike called the Sprint, marking Harley's actual return to lightweight motorcycles for the first time since the 1960s. Whether those two bikes can actually pull a younger rider into a Harley dealership for the first time in their life might be the single biggest question hanging over this entire turnaround. Every turnaround attempt has failed, until maybe now. Here's what makes this story genuinely frustrating if you've followed this brand for a while. It's not like Harley hasn't tried to fix this before. Under former CEO Jochen Seitz, Harley doubled down on premium touring bikes and heavyweight cruisers instead. It didn't work. Sales in those exact categories fell more than 20% from 2019 levels. Then there was Livewire, Harley's big bet on electric motorcycles, meant to bring in younger, more environmentally minded riders. In 2025, Livewire sold just 653 motorcycles worldwide, not 653,000, 653 total, while posting a $75 million operating loss. Behind the scenes, things got messy too. In April 2025, an activist investor group called H Partners went to war with leadership, with their board representative resigning and publicly accusing the company of, quote, cultural depletion. Zeitz eventually stepped down, and Artie Starrs took over as CEO in October 2025. Around the same time, Harley also got pulled into a political firestorm over its diversity programs, which had ended amid public pressure, an episode that a departing board member warned may have left a, quote, lasting impact on how customers feel about the brand. So picture the position Starrs actually inherited. An aging customer base on one side, younger buyers who never fully showed up on the other, a failed electric bike experiment in the middle, a board that had just been through a public war with itself. And that's the situation Back to the Bricks was actually built to fix: the tariff squeeze. On top of everything else, Harley got caught in a trade war it didn't start. The company absorbed about $67 million in extra tariff costs in 2025. For 2026, it's now guiding investors to expect somewhere between $75 and $90 million, actually down from an original estimate that ran as high as $105 million, thanks to some recent exemptions on certain parts. Europe hit even harder. When the EU raised its retaliatory tariff on American-made motorcycles to 50% on top of an existing base tariff, Harley basically got priced out of one of its biggest overseas markets almost overnight. A European court ruling also closed a loophole Harley had been using to build bikes in Thailand to dodge some of those costs. So layer that on top of everything else. A home market that's aging out, margins that are already razor thin because of the Back to the Bricks strategy, and now trade costs eating into whatever profit is left over. Has Harley been here before? Now here's where this story actually gets interesting, because this isn't the first time Harley-Davidson has stared down the possibility of dying. Between 1969 and 1981, Harley was owned by a company called AMF, and quality control basically fell apart. Bikes leaked oil right there on showroom floors. In 1981, 13 executives led by Vaughn Beals bought the company back from AMF for around $80 million, a moment that became known inside the company as the Eagle Soars Alone. 2 years later, President Reagan slapped heavy tariffs on large imported Japanese motorcycles, buying Harley some breathing room. But most historians agree the tariffs alone didn't save the company. What actually saved it was an internal overhaul that cut manufacturing defect rates from around 50% down to just 1% within a few years. Then in 2009, during the financial crisis, Harley found itself in real trouble again. Credit markets froze almost overnight, and HDFS, the same financing arm that just got downgraded this year, was in genuine danger. That's when Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway stepped in and loaned Harley $300 million at a brutal 15% interest rate. Buffett later joked at a shareholder meeting that he chose to lend money instead of buying stock because, quote, "I kinda like a business where your customers tattoo your name on their chest." So Harley has clawed its way back from the edge twice before. But here's the distinction that actually matters. First it was quality, fix the product and customers come back. Then it was liquidity, a temporary credit freeze that thawed once the broader economy recovered. Now it's demographics. You can't fix an aging customer base with better manufacturing or a bridge loan. The people who love this brand the most are simply getting older, and the generation that was supposed to replace them mostly never showed up, at least not yet. That doesn't mean Harley is doomed. Companies do reinvent themselves. But it does mean this turnaround needs something the last two didn't require: actually changing who the customer is, not just building a better product for the customer they already had. What happens next? So where does that leave Harley-Davidson right now? The stock itself didn't crash on the downgrade news, mostly because it had been expected since S&P first flagged concerns back in February. Shares were trading in the mid-$20 range, with a market cap that's a fraction of what this company was worth back in its late 1990s peak. Moody's and Fitch, the other two major ratings agencies, haven't followed S&P's move yet, though Fitch still carries a negative outlook of its own, which reads a lot like a warning shot. Harley's next quarterly earnings report lands later this month, and it's going to tell us a lot. If Back to the Bricks keeps growing sales the way it did in the first quarter, and the Sportster and Sprint actually pull in the younger riders Harley desperately needs, there's a real path back towards stability. If it doesn't, this junk downgrade might end up looking like the first domino instead of the last one. For a brand that built its entire identity on freedom and the open road, there's something almost fitting about the fact that its biggest threat right now isn't a competitor or even a bad product. It's math, margins, debt, and a customer base that's slowly running out of road. Whether Harley pulls off a third comeback or whether this really is a different kind of problem than the ones it's beaten before is something worth watching closely over the next year. If you want to see how this plays out, subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because I don't think we've heard the last of this one. And if you ride, or you used to, or your dad had one of these parked in the garage growing up, let me know in the comments what you think is actually going on with this brand. I read everyone. Thanks for watching.